things you need to know about body language. And the second part is going to be how you utilize that on Zoom or Skype or on the smaller screens that we're looking at for our interviews. So let's start out by saying that we're going to be talking about the background, the definitions. We'll go through and talk about gestures. We'll talk about cultural differences because it's a virtual world and you have no idea who you're going to be working for in the future. Maybe somebody that has a completely different set of cultures, and that makes a difference in how you're going to be talking to them and gesturing. We're going to talk about a couple LinkedIn profiles because that's the first clue that people have of what your body language is. And then we're going to go through the interview tips and get a little bit more detail on how you do it online. So the background is that this is really new science. The first discussion of body language really came out in the 1950s, the 1960s. That's as far back as the books go. And at that time, everything was an absolute. So that if you touched your finger to your nose, that meant you were lying every time. And we now know that body language is a cluster, it's a collection, and one single gesture isn't going to tell the whole story. But in general, body language is going to be face-to-face. It's going to be known as nonverbal communication if you're looking it up in other Google activities. And it goes both ways. One is that you need to be in control of your own body language, and you need to be watching what other people are sitting, standing, gesturing, so that you can have a feel for what their language is really telling you on the uncommunicated side. There was a study that was done by LinkedIn last year that asked about what's important in an interview. And most recruiters and talent professionals said that technical skills were indeed the most important part, but that soft skills also needed to be evaluated before you could offer somebody a job with the anticipation that they're going to do well in the job and stay with the company. So the best way to find what those soft skills are, behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult person. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss. Those are all talking about how you actually worked through a problem. But reading body language, 70% of the recruiters say that they utilize that in order to determine the soft skills that a person has. A bit of a surprise, but not necessarily when you realize that many studies have indicated that the way that we communicate is only 7% verbal. 7% of our communication is the words that we're using, the sentence structure, how we organize our thoughts. 38% is from our vocal behavior. What words do you stress? How your sentence is accentuated throughout it. So vocal behavior and how you speak is going to be more important than the actual words you're using. But 55% of all communication is through body language. How we're sitting, what our face looks like, how we're gesturing. That's an important piece to consider when you're having an interview. So back to the caution. A single gesture is not going to be an absolute determination of what that person is thinking or feeling. We're going to be looking at all possible clusters of body language in order to get a feel for what the person actually is feeling. Now, studies have been shown that we use snap judgments all the time. So when you're in a networking event or when you're meeting new people, your brain in a very primitive manner is going to try and assess, do I like this person? Do I not like them? Or do I not care? So if you're first meeting someone within the first 3 seconds, you could decide that you like that person because there's something about that person that you feel you have in common. And here's the trick on this. If a recruiter or if somebody who is meeting you in the lobby to take you into your first interview decides that they like you, they're going to make up stories in order to reinforce that decision. They're going to be more inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt, and they're going to be able to be more positive about you. However, it could just as easily be the other way. They could make a snap decision that they dislike you, and there goes the interview. You can overcome this because thankfully the human brain is capable of changing its mind on the basis of additional information. But there are times when you're going to meet someone and you just don't like them. Either you think that they are a threat to you or that you have so little in common that you don't want to know them any better. But the same thing happens as when there's a like decision, in that people will make up stories and will not give you the benefit of the doubt throughout the interview or throughout the discussion. Most of the time, you don't care. You meet someone, you shake their hand, then you turn and you meet the next person, and you've already forgotten the person's name that you just talked to because it's a neutral. Your body does not recognize this person as either a threat or as someone who could be similar to you and that you might like them. You are able to influence this snap judgment by having positive body language, having a smile. Now, Business Insider did a poll and found that within the first 3 seconds that you meet someone, whether it's face-to-face or through an interview like Zoom or Skype, you make some of these decisions. What do you think of those? Yikes. Now, the problem with this is that some of this decision is not going to be absolute. And someone who is making this characterization, who is older, may have a completely different view of you than somebody who is much younger. There are a lot of generational differences in these snap judgments. So if you've got a facial tattoo, someone who is in an older generation might think less of you, and someone who is in one of the younger generations, like the millennials, might not see that that's an important characteristic and doesn't mean much of anything at all. So people are going to make these judgments, but depending on what their background is, what their age is, what their education is, what their standards are, may depend on what they decide this feature means. Let's talk about some of the gestures that we're going to be seeing. Head movement. If the head is tilted to the side, quite often it means interest, particularly if the head is tilted and it's moved so that you can see more of an ear. If the head is tilted and the person is pointing their ear towards you, that means there is a strong interest. They want to hear you better. It can also mean, though, that the person is being submissive to you and that they're showing you their jugular just like a wild animal would. Nodding can mean a couple different things. If it's slow, then it can mean that the person is thinking about what you're saying. If it's a medium nod, they've decided to agree with it, and that nod indicates, yep, I think so too. But if the person is nodding quickly, it can quite often mean, I hear this story, I understand where you're going, let's move on, I'm bored, get to your next point. So when you're talking about nodding and you're looking at somebody to assess how they're nodding, you need to remember that they've got some basic amount of head movement in their normal repertoire. Some people are just bobblehead dolls and are going to be nodding all the time no matter what you say. They're going to be a lot harder to read on the nodding. But someone who is normally very still in their head movement, you'll be able to make some type of an assessment at that point. Now, the hands to the face. Not many good things when people put their hands to their face. Generally, if they're going to be rubbing their nose, it could mean that they think you're lying or that there's some doubt as to what you're saying. If they're pinching the bridge of their nose and closing their eyes, sometimes that can mean that they're having negative thoughts. Playing with their ear, tugging at it, pulling at it, means they're sometimes being indecisive, not sure what to think about it. And if somebody is stroking their chin, it means they're trying to make a decision, but this is normally something that a man will do and not a woman. Women don't tend to stroke their chin, they tend to move their finger across the bottom of their chin. Men tend to stroke it as if they were playing with their beard. In general, keep your hands away from your face. Keep your hands away from your head. Generally doesn't mean anything good, doesn't add any value to what you're saying. How about that handshake? Remember when we used to meet people and shake their hands? Those days may be gone for good, but let's make sure that we're comfortable with what's happening on a handshake. When a person approaches you to shake your hand, and that's the normal business greeting, you're going to wait until they're fairly close to you so that you can put your hand out and shake hands so that it is hand into the other person's hand. If you put your hand out too closely, there's more likelihood that the person is going to grab the tip of your fingers, and that's really an awkward kind of handshake. So wait until the person's fairly close, then extend your hand. You're going to want to have a firm grasp. Don't try and be too wimpy. Don't try and be too firm. You're just trying to make contact. And make sure that when you're shaking hands, that's the only part of the body that you're touching. You have not been given permission to put both hands over their hand, which is a sign of dominance. You're not being given permission to slap them on the shoulder as you're shaking their hand. That's also a sign of dominance. So keep it straightforward, 2 or 3 shakes, let go, move on. Hand gestures are going to be an important part of your conversation because a hand gesture is going to re-emphasize what your points are, and it looks really abnormal if you're not moving your hands at all and you're just sitting on them. So Stanford University did a study where they walked into a large hall of students and said, like you, everybody on this side of the room, to stand up and move to the other side of the room. They did this in multiple classrooms. They all had very large numbers of people. And the only thing that changed was their hand gesture. Was their palm up when they asked people to move? Was the palm down, or were they pointing? No surprise, but when they used that palm up, which is more of an inviting move, 84% of the people actually did stand up and move to the other side of the room. If it was the palm down, it's not quite demanding, but it's not quite open and nice. Only about half the people moved. But when the request was using a pointing finger, it was more of a demand, and people pushed back on that. Only 28% of the people got up and moved to the other side of the room. What does that mean to you when you're talking? Generally, when you're talking and you're standing, you're going to keep your palms up. When you're sitting down, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but make sure you're not using a pointing, and make sure, if at all possible, you can keep a palm up in your discussions. Now your arms. Crossing the arms is normally considered a defensive move. It's protecting your body, and it's trying to put some distance between you and the person that you're talking to. It's not always the case, of course. Sometimes it just means that you're feeling cold, or sometimes it means that you're feeling a little bit sick and you're trying to put pressure in your stomach area so that you're more comfortable. But stay away from the arms crossing, because some people do take that as a defensive move and a lack of openness. Now look at Usain Bolt. Arms up, arms wide, victory. People who were born without any sight at all and have never seen this will still raise their arms in victory. It's one of the few motions and gestures that we have found that is universal. But everybody will raise their arms up when they're happy, when they're successful, when they're trying to show victory. Wait until you're in the parking lot to do it. Hands on hips, legs a little bit apart. That's the Superman pose. This shows a lot of confidence. This shows a little bit of aggression, and that there's a feeling of confidence there that might not be warranted. But being able to use this is a strong statement of, I'm here, I'm ready to take on the world, I've got the confidence to do it. If other people in a group are also doing it, that could be a fight for dominance. So be careful about that. But being able to stand like this before you start an interview generally tells your mind that you are confident and is considered to be a nice thing to do before an interview. So before you get on an interview, spend 30 seconds standing, Superman pose, taking those deep breaths, practicing a little bit of what you're going to be saying, and you should be able to move that confidence into your interview. Arm gestures are important, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's on a Zoom interview. They do reinforce your message, and people do feel more comfortable if you are gesturing and whether you are showing that you've got some passion for what you're saying. Don't go too wild, especially when you're taking a look at yourself on screen. Try to keep your arms and hands inside the screen, not above the clavicle, which would be right below the shoulder area. Keep elbows fairly close to the body. It'll help you out there. Crossing legs. Just like when we said that crossing arms can be a defensive position, crossing the legs can be also. But if you notice the way that this woman on the left is sitting, she's got her legs crossed, but there's nothing else about her that says defensiveness. Her arms are off to the side so that they're not pushed in a defensive position. Her head is up, chin tilted up. She's got a smile on her face. So although legs could be considered to be a defensive position, they're not in this instance. One of those reasons why you look for a cluster instead of just one feature. Now this figure 4 that the man has on the right is considered a little bit more dominant, a little bit more aggressive. Men sit like this, women generally don't. It's not a natural position for a woman, but a man can often do this in an interview and be perceived as being a little bit too domineering or aggressive. Keep feet on the floor whenever possible. Even when you're in a Zoom interview where they can't see you, your body language is going to be reflected in your tone and what you're saying. So being able to keep your body where it needs to be is going to help you find the right words and the right tone. And remember that that verbal tone is a big part of communicating your message. Smiles are important. Mona Lisa has one of the most famous smiles. Enigmatic, we don't know what she's thinking. People are now saying that one of the reasons that she's enigmatic is that her smile is in her lips, but not necessarily in her eyes. So when you have a smile, make sure it's a sincere smile, that it's going to be fairly slow to form, it's going to be reasonable, and your eyes are going to crinkle up a bit. As you can see from the right-hand picture, you don't see the woman's face, but you know she's smiling because her eyes are crinkled up and her body language is indicating that she's happy. A one-sided smile is not necessarily a good thing because an off-sided facial feature is often sarcastic or unbelieving. Don't bare too many teeth. You do want to show your teeth when you smile, but don't make it a grimace. You know the difference. The eyes are an important part. There's something called an eyebrow flash. The eyebrows go up and down quickly in order to show that you're a friend, that you're intrigued, that you're interested. If you meet someone for the first time and they do that quick eyebrow flash, just going up and down, it means that they've made a determination that they like you. Nice thing to see in an interview. Direct eye contact shows that you're interested and it shows honesty. It's a little harder to do on a Zoom interview because you're generally looking at the screen instead of the camera. Practice looking at the camera. You're going to be able to want to watch the person so that you can see what their body language is. But when you're responding, quite often you're going to want to make eye contact through the camera. If you're blinking too much, that can be a sign of nervousness. Some people are blinkers because they have contacts that are new. It is allergy season, so there's a lot of blinking going on anyway. But if you see somebody that is suddenly blinking a lot, it could mean that what you said made them nervous, and you may want to go back and restate what your answer was. If somebody is squinting, sometimes that can mean that they're unhappy or they're feeling threatened. Once again, the eyes are going to be one of your best clues when you're on a Zoom interview. If you see that the eyes are beginning to look a little bit squinted or blinking, restate what you were saying in order to make it a little bit different wording and perhaps change your body language a bit. Where to look? The power gaze is definitely centered around the eyes. Social gazing encompasses most of the whole face. Intimate gazing is used in social situations and goes below the chin. Keep your eyes up. Mirroring is an important part of body language. It means that you have the same body language that the person that you're talking to has, which means that there's a little bit of rapport there. You're saying that you like the same things, you understand the same things, and whenever people start mirroring what you have as your body language, it's a good sign that they agree with you. You should also make a decision to mirror somebody else's body language. Wait a few seconds, then use their body language. When you're in group interviews, and sometimes you'll see those on Zoom also, a little bit more difficult, but it can be done. You'll quite often see that the people in a room are mirroring the body language of the person who is most dominant in that meeting. Cultural differences. If you're talking with people who had a background from a different country, you're going to be more sensitive about what your body language is and what your gestures are. For instance, the thumbs up is a perfectly acceptable thing to do in a lot of countries, but it means something that is very nasty in other countries. Stay away from things other than the general gestures of palms up, and you're generally going to be okay there. There's 6 universal facial expressions: anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, and surprise, that we found throughout the world in all cultures, no matter how basic those cultures are or how advanced those cultures are. Interesting that we do have certain features for people that indicate very strong emotions. Hope you don't need those in the interview other than the one for joy. Interview tips in general. You can take a look at this information. This was from a survey of 2,000 bosses, and these are the common nonverbal mistakes that are made in an interview. Some of them are going to be more useful on your face-to-face interviews when those start up again, but some of them are going to be used regardless of whether you're face-to-face or whether you're on a Zoom. Playing or touching your hair, touching your face, stay away from that type of thing. Not knowing what the company does when you're asked that question. But once again, what we're seeing is that what people say, the quality of their voice, and their body language, how we dress, how we act, how we use our gestures, are going to be an important part of any interview. Knowing what to wear on a Zoom or any other type of interview is going to be important. Generally, you're going to want solid colors. Sometimes stripes don't come over very well and they'll look a little bit wavy and can be distracting. Too many patterns in what you're wearing can be distracting also, and be careful about using too much in the way of jewelry because that can distract also. Here's just a general chart on what we think on body language, facial, eyes, head, body position, and hand gestures. You're not going to be able to remember all of this while you're interviewing, so making sure that you look through this type of information before you get on the interview is going to be helpful so that you at least are in control of your body language. So those video interviews, yeah. Maintain good eye contact. Try and look in the camera as much as possible rather than at your computer screen. Sitting up straight is going to give you the good posture. It shows alertness. It shows that you're interested. And when you're slouching down in your seat, it does look as if you're trying to distance yourself. Leaning into the interviewer, you're probably going to start in a fairly comfortable position with your back against your chair. Being able to lean in occasionally so that you're indicating a little bit more interest, that you're trying to get more information from that person, and then move back a little bit later so that you're in your resting position for the rest of the interview. But leaning in is going to show interest, and that's going to come across no matter how small your screen is. Keeping gestures to a minimum. You do want to use gestures. You just don't want to be flailing around and going outside the screen. And you're not going to want so many movements that it distracts from what you're saying. One tip is don't cross your arms, don't cross your legs when you're doing an interview. The person who's interviewing you isn't going to be able to see your whole body. Hopefully it's just a shoulder and head shot, but they're going to be able to tell if your voice tightens up. And when you've got your body closed off with arms crossed, legs crossed, it can be reflected in your voice. Nodding when it's appropriate. Being able to indicate that you understand the question, that you agree with what is being said, is an important part of showing the trust that you've got in that interviewer, whether it's a recruiter or a hiring manager. And remember to smile. The smile makes more of an impact because it means that you're relaxed, that you agree with things, that you've got some trust in the person that you're talking with. Now let's take a look at your LinkedIn picture, because that's going to be quite often the first thing that a recruiter sees about you. They may have found you on LinkedIn. They may have found you through a resume that you submitted to the company. But quite often a recruiter is going to go to your LinkedIn profile to see if you have more information there, and if there's additional information that's going to help them make a decision. So on the profile picture, this one is not particularly good unless this person is a vet or has some type of an occupation dealing with animals. If you're looking for a professional job that does not deal with animals, you keep the cats and dogs out of the way, no matter how adorable those pets may be. Now here's an important person, but look how close that person is to the view of the camera. You shouldn't be too close to the camera. You should show your full head. You should show part of your shoulders. Otherwise, it can be an intimidating picture because you're pushing in on the person's space. And that's not a good thing to do. And in this picture, the person has their head tilted too much and looks way too submissive to be considered for a position that would be responsible. When you've got a headshot, it doesn't necessarily need to be professional. It certainly looks good if you do get a professional picture, but you do want your head to be straight up and down. You do want it to show who you are. You want a little bit of a smile there to show that you're welcoming, but don't try and get too busy or try to get too cute with it. This is business. You're looking professional. So, summary and next steps. Single body language signal is not what you're looking for. If you do see something that steps out and may be a problem for you, look at the other body language features to see if that is reinforced elsewhere. You're looking for clusters in order to get the most reliable read from the other person. And the example at the bottom, crossed arms could be defensive, but both crossed arms and crossed legs, yeah, you're probably getting into a closed off situation. Something is making that person uncomfortable. If there are a lot of features that show uncomfortableness, defensiveness, then you better really back off, restate yourself, and try and get on with the interview in a more positive manner. Next steps, when you're at home, you can be assessing your body language. When you're out and about, you can be looking at other people's body languages, even through the face mask. There's the rest of their body to look at. Practice with your family. When you're getting together with your family, just take a snapshot of them and take a look and try and figure out what they're thinking, what they're doing, how they're feeling about the situation. Watching movies is a good one to do. And comedies tend to have more body language because a comedy is going to generally overemphasize body language in order to put the humor in the situation. But any kind of movie is probably going to be a good bet if you're studying the body language to see why you believe that actor has really brought that character to life. And if you need more information, there's plenty of information out there now, both on YouTube and in general. Just Google body language, find what you like, and try and learn it yourself. Thank you. Are you on mute?
Jeff, you're muted.
Yes, I need to unmute myself. Okay, questions. Sorry about that. If anybody has questions, please raise your hand. I know Ernesto had a question. I think I saw his hand up, or just unmute yourself and off we go.
Actually, Jeff, I was just indicating that I couldn't hear you.
Oh, thank you.
Jeff,